This episode is sponsored by Game Maker. Yeah, it's finally here, puppy. So, was it worth the wait? You think so? Well, I also enjoyed my time with it, but I have some questions about some of the finer details of its designs. Well, let me explain. In our previous episode on Hollow Knight, we covered how its early game is designed to make the player feel bad, which makes eventually overcoming that challenge feel all the sweeter. But is that still the case with Silksong? Well, we'll get into that, but before I tear into the inner workings of its more unfortunate stuttering cogs, I want to preface that I adored this game. I believe the advancements Team Jerry have made in combat and platforming are monumental and give the player a sense of control I have never seen in a 2D platformer before. The tools, selectable abilities and core moveset give Hornet a cornucopia of ways to counter enemy slams, dashes and projectiles. The greater emphasis on parrying enemy attacks gives weight to your own, and bosses remain readable even with a bunch of ads thrown in. And abilities designed to allow you to quickly re-enter and disengage from the fray make combat feel so much more fluid. And the same can be said for platforming. The incredible foundation Hollow Knight laid has been improved upon, taking a simple dash and turning it into a sprint that can be comboed into an extended jump or attack. This combined with the grapple leads to, well, once mechanical mastery settles in, incredibly satisfying movement among the scenery and enemies alike. Which is important, as you'll be doing a bunch more backtracking this time around due to Silksong's newly introduced quest system, which encourages more thoughtful exploration that's not wholly centered around the map and is a fantastic addition to the game. But as much as I fell in love with these systems, my problems begin with how they're all taught to the player. For example, in Hollow Knight, you're not explicitly taught how to pogo jump with your down slash. The closest thing they have is the hidden grub challenge that forces you to pogo off of spikes, and it's the same here in Silksong. There's no dedicated tutorial whatsoever, and you're left to work via trial and error. And to top it all off, in Hollow Knight, this action required one input of the analog stick and an attack. But here, for some unfathomable reason, they've given Hornet a diagonal down slash attack depending on her initial facing direction, and then require the player to alter their orientation mid-jump, pushing their analog stick in the desired direction. And because they have the most sensitive dead zone known to man, a lot of time you'll just simply attack instead of down slashing, sending you to your thorny doom. And to add a cherry on top of that, because it's a diagonal attack, the positional requirement of the player is doubled, as it's no longer simply a horizontal adjustment to align yourself with the object, but also directional, with tight room for error. And they led with this design. And what I mean by this is the game actually becomes infinitely easier in this regard once you find the Reaper or Wanderer's crest, which alter Hornet's moveset and playstyle and replace her diagonal down attack with the Knight's original one. So why did they choose to open the game with the one attack that the majority of people are going to have the most issues with? Because it closely lines up with Hornet's moveset from Hollow Knight boss fights? Well, yeah, that's true, but was that worth it? Its design discourages players from using it in combat due to its complexity compared to the alternatives, leading a lot of players, well, especially new ones, to not utilizing it as intended. This can also be seen in the grapple using Silk, which, yeah, makes sense thematically, but just means if you have limited Silk, which is common, you have to wait on hooks for it to replenish, leading to a lot of downtime. And this is the thing, when you use the grapple in combat, hitting an enemy will refund the Silk that you spent, making it effectively free. Well, yes, if you do have enough Silk, you can use the grapple twice in the air, this is true, but because the developers can never fully account for how much Silk a player will have at any one point in time, they cannot incorporate double grapples into legit platforming challenges without a hoop or an enemy to reset them and regain that Silk. So why does the grapple cost Silk at all? Completely removing the Silk cost and having the grapple's usage reset once you remain stationary or hit an enemy would encourage more of its uses in combat and also completely stop this hoop downtime. Yes, this is a tiny detail, but these things add up when you're trying to condition and teach your players silently. In an ideal world, you want your players to utilize all of their platforming and combat options as much as they possibly can, because that's where the fun is. I cannot stress how fluid and satisfying the movement is once you get used to all of this, and I promise that you will eventually get good at it because of how unbelievable the boss runs are. Now, a lot of people have been complaining about Silksong's difficulty as of late, but to be honest, It's not that difficult. And now before you say get in line for the shower, you sweaty beast, what I'm trying to say is that Silksong isn't difficult per se, it's punishing. Think of difficulty in terms of a puzzle. It could be incredibly difficult, but there is no punishment involved for failure to understand or execute the solution. Enjoyment comes from overcoming that, whereas punishment has nothing to do with the inherent challenge. For example, getting over it. It's extremely simple to play mechanically, but if you make one mistake, you could lose hours of progress. So how does Silksong punish its players? Well, firstly, nearly all bosses do 2 damage per hit, which is certainly a choice. This can also be seen in certain environment hazards, but I genuinely believe that this might be, pun intended, a bug. Because you're not taking 2 damage from these thorns, you're taking 1 damage twice. Now, some hazards are 100% designed to do 2 damage. Lava, for example, has a specific charm to take its damage down from 2 to 1, but when you fall into lava, it does all of its damage in 1 instance rather than 2. I think they may have forgotten to activate invulnerability when the player hits a hazard as they transition them to the temporary checkpoint, so as you remain inside the hurt box of that hazard, you take another instance of damage. It's food for thought, but it is unmistakably intentional in boss designs though. And yes, in Hollow Knight, some bosses did 2 damage too, but only late game ones, and they did so to show size, intensity of the attack, and scale the game based on player acquired health. But here, nearly all bosses, big or small, do 2 damage, dramatically making the game more punishing, and there's not a lot of room for growth scaling wise either. When introductory bosses do as much damage as Absolute Radiance does at the end of Hollow Knight, it starts to feel a little bit inflated in that department. And it's not even just the attack. Making bodily contact with bosses also does 2 damage, which goes further to discourage usage of the movement abilities that transport you towards the boss, which, let me check my notes, is most of them. All of this basically halves the player's health from 6 to 3, making it incredibly difficult for players to actually learn the fights. And these issues are just compounded upon with all of the changes made to how healing works. Previously, the knight could spend a portion of a resource to heal a single mask of damage, but in Silksong, the player has to build up to a specific amount of silk before they can execute a large free mask heal, which seems like a net positive, right? Well, just like with the first game, if you're hit mid-heal, you lose all of the resource you were attempting to use, which is fine when it's only 1/5 of the total, but in Silksong, you lose over half of your entire resource bar and have to build back up to it all over again, meaning you're probably cooked for the rest of the fight. This also completely discourages players from attempting to use silk abilities due to how much you need to build up for a heal, and this is only exacerbated by the 2 damage issue and leads to a lot of rage-inducing deaths, which isn't helped by the lengthy and sometimes challenging in their own right runbacks to the boss arenas. These can range anywhere from 30 seconds to 4 minutes in length, with their own sets of enemies, hazards, and challenges. Every mistake making your chances of actually killing the boss crumble before you. They are extremely frustrating, but as many players have claimed, they're not here to simply waste the player's time. They are 100% intentional, and we have proof. So for example, this run back to the climactic boss in Sinner's Road is incredibly long, even taunting you with a broken bench halfway through. So is this designed to deliberately waste your time? Well, there are other examples, even within this very runback, of the developers deliberately minimizing the player's wasted time. For example, the elevator that begins this journey has a full travel time of this, but if you call it from below, they shorten the time for it to appear by 1/3, meaning they spent extra care and attention to detail to make sure calling this elevator wasn't wasting your time, meaning the runbacks are intentionally designed to be punishing, and this has a lot to do with thematics. The famously brutal run-up to the last judge has been complained about ad nauseum online, but I guarantee you its punishing nature was intentional, so you'd lose all of your rosaries attempting to fight them, which is all in service of the thematics of the following area, the Underworks, which has a theme of capitalist cogwork nightmare with benches that are pay per use, like some kind of penny stand-up. Let's see how many fellow Dickensian orphans get that joke. This nickel and diming you for benches and the added tension that brings to the area wouldn't work if you were flush with rosary beads, hence why the last judge and its brutal runback are designed the way they are. The pain and frustration caused by these runbacks can also encourage more thoughtful exploration, like with the broken bench I mentioned before in Sinner's Road, that seems to be an evil joke until you explore and realize it can be fixed, which is extremely rewarding. But this isn't always the case, as seen with one of my biggest frustrations with Silksong, currencies. But before we do that, Ludo, we need to make some IRL beads by shouting out today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Game Maker, and if you've ever wanted to get into game development, Game Maker does this really crazy thing where it's free, just start making and only pay when you want to release your game to the world commercially.
It's fast, it's user-friendly, and there's easy-to-follow tutorials, plus a dedicated community to help answer even my questions. How make man jump? Game Maker is a 2D game engine that's helped bring some of yours and my favorite recent experiences to life, like UFO 50, Chicory, Anton Blast, and of course, Yahtzee's own Starstruck Vagabond.
Ooh, we talking about Game Maker? I love that program, it's so easy to use. As well as Starstruck Vagabond, I also used it to make all 12 projects in my 12 games in 12 months Dev Diary challenge. And I couldn't believe how much sex I got out of that. None. I got none at all. Which I couldn't believe.
So what are you waiting for? Head on over to the Game Maker link in the description and start cracking away today, because we want to play your game.
Yeah, looking through this list, I'm seeing one of you made Armpit Fart Tycoon, and I've got several questions for you. Now, currencies. We spoke about it in my last episode, how Geo encouraged enemy engagement and gave the player something meaningful they could lose on death, increasing the tension felt during gameplay, and that is still the case here with beads. The issue begins with the introduction of a secondary currency / resource with these shell shards. One of these things is not like the other. Shards are used as donations in certain questlines and as a refill for certain tools. You don't lose these on death, but if you run out of them, you cannot use your tools at all, which for one disincentivizes their use in combat till you're fully committed to a fight, which is hard to gauge at the best of times, but the issues don't stop there. Enemies either drop beads and shards on death, or only shards, depending on if they would thematically have little bug pockets to hold their spare change. So if you're full of shards and enemies don't drop beads, there is very little incentive to engage with them at all. And an additional issue with this is that for large stretches of gameplay, no beads can be acquired at all. So a lot of the time you'll end up getting to a bench that requires a certain amount of beads to unlock, and the entire area you've just trekked through dropped 0, unless you've been paying your bead taxes like a good little capitalist bug. This was a personal problem for me when I was doing the Mount Frey Icy platforming gauntlet. I got to what I thought was the halfway point and luckily found a bench, but had not a single bead to my name because no mobs dropped any on the way up. I was done for. I even popped my post-tax bead threads and still didn't have enough. But the developers thought of this. Kind of. There's a hidden room of beads right next door to the bench, but guess what? It still isn't enough. 87 out of 90? You've got to be pulling my mandibles, mate. What do you want me to do? Pick myself up by my silken bootstraps and carry on? Or gamble for them, because I bloody will? Or, I don't know, tactically unalive myself in the icy depths, track back to the bell station, go to a completely different area to farm beads, come all the way back up the hellish gauntlet again just to have enough for a single bench? Yeah, you'd have to be an utter twat to do that. Why do only certain enemies drop beads? Is this to stop farming? Well, because not all enemies drop them, you need to go to specific areas to kill specific enemies, which is the definition of farming. I absolutely adored 90% of the game's designs, but all of these specific ones baffled me to no end, feeling like a regression from what came before them, and I keep going over in my head of why they were made, and I think a lot of it comes down to narrative cohesion valued over the play experience. Hornet's grapple must use Silk because that's what it uses narratively. She must start with the diagonal downslash because that's what she had in the first game. Runbacks in areas must be brutal to convey the capitalist downfall of this corrupt bug kingdom that uses honks and doots to communicate, and this bug can't drop beads because it's female and therefore her jorts have no pockets. Narratively, it all makes sense, but my question is, would it make the game a lot more fun if those buggy jorts did in fact have pockets? But what do you think? In what area has Silksong made improvements on its predecessor, and in what ways has it regressed? Let us know down below, because we would love to discuss this with you. Oi, Ludes, I just checked and I saw that you're not in the second win Patreon. And can I tell you, Missy, that you are missing out. We have Patreon Hangout movie nights, we have exclusive experimental videos, and a bunch of other goodies that you could be involved in, but I guess you're too busy with, I don't know, not having thumbs. Well, yeah, that is fair. You do work here too. Okay, yeah, I'll get you added to that after this. Alright, time to say goodbye, Ludo. Alright, bye guys.